3 of the science.
Yeah, because I sat on the, well, yeah, I got 3 to science because I sat in the cytokinesis toss up. Because I'm like, what do we call it when we split this thing up?
Did you really do?
Hey, need names, guys, over here.
Alex?
Tristan. Andrew.
Shinmei. How do you spell that again?
Yes.
Shin. And then me. Then me like the month?
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Kenji, right?
Yes.
I'm not curious at which this is.
You hear they beat, they just beat again.
Yes.
Getting more and more interesting. All right, you got all their names?
Yeah.
All right, let's rock and roll. Toss up 1. After being passed over for ecclesiastical offices, 2 priests in this state claimed that the Pope gave them the power to liberate it and led the conspiracy of the Pintos, named for the palace where they gathered. The Archbishop of this state convened the Synod of Diamper, which attempted to Latinize the liturgy and subjugate outlying areas, but was rebuffed by the Coon and Cross Oath delivered by St. Thomas Christians. A group of men murdered here were known as the Martyrs of Cumcolim, including 2 who jumped into the sea at Asolna Fort. Much later, the state became part of a Union territory along with the exclaves of Daman and Diu on the coast. It's Bom Jesus, but so
Goa?
that's right. Your bonus. Answer some questions about the island of Honshu. For 10 points each, this lowland area contains the capital of Tokyo and is drained by the Tone River system. It was the site and namesake of a massacre occurred in 1923, resulting in over 100,000 deaths. Yes, the underwater Seikan Tunnel connects Honshu with this island to the north, the second largest island in Japan. It's separated from Honshu by the Tsugaru Strait. It's the longest river in Japan. Is the namesake of a historical province where Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin battled on Kawana-Kajima Plain during the Warring States period. The Okozu Canal in this river irrigates the Niigata Plains.
Do you know it?
What do you got?
Do you know what?
Ito. No, it's the Shinano River or the Chikuma River.
Oh.
Toss up 2. In a long speech, this character asserts that we die on the march, but there is nothing outside the march, so nothing can be lost to it, before pretending to translate Latin while actually reciting a Shakespeare speech from memory. Near the end of the play, this character says, when we have found all the meanings and lost all the mysteries, we will be alone on an empty shore, shortly before agreeing to waltz with another character. After this character returns from a rabbit hunt, he is confronted with 2 letters, one of which is full of rice pudding, and the other of which results in him being invited to sleep with Lady Kroom. He narrowly avoids fighting a duel by heaping praise on the Couch of Arrows, a bad poem by Ezra Chatter. In his very first lines, he claims that throwing one's arms around the side of beef. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Your bonus. Its last novel is The Four-Gated City, which out of novels about the African-born Martha Quest. It traces Martha's journey from the fictional Zambezia to London after World War II.
Children of Island.
This winner of the 2007 Lit Nobel wrote the Children of Island series, as well as the 5-novel sci-fi series Canopus and Argos Archives. 4 diaries by Anna Wolf figure into this woman's novel, The Golden
Lesson.
An unemployed squatter named Alice becomes involved in the CCU in the Doris Lessing novel title For the Good One of These People. This occupation is a John Updike novel by Jack Levy and Amon Leroy's never heard of. 30 points. 3. This treatise's 10th chapter claims that the brute has no guardian spirit, but his instinctive organs, comparing him to a bird that might lose its eyes, thereby gaining its guardian angel. This book calls the imagination a middle term between the abstract and the concrete in a section that explains the cosmogonical principle. Another chapter of this text states that each planet has a different position relative to the sun, so they each have their own sun. After a positive account of its subject in the first section, this book's second part discusses the anthropological aspects of the dream of the human mind. This book claims that the primary object of man's consciousness is the infinity of his own nature, and that a deity with no attributes cannot exist. Translated by George Eliot into English, it claims that God is a fictitious projection of humankind. 10 points name this book on religion by Ludwig Feuerbach.
That's the essence of Christianity.
Your bonus. Answer some questions about first order logic. 10 points each. First order logic allows use of these constructs which are not allowed in propositional logic. The existential one, which semantically translates to there exists, is represented by the backwards quantifiers. The automated form of this activity often begins with the conversion of a statement in first-order logic to Skoll in normal form, in which all existential quantifiers have been removed. Then a well-known first-order formula can be shown to be true or false.
Wait, it's not just colonization? They said
What do you have?
colonization.
It's theorem proving. automated theorem.
Yeah.
By applying the compactness theorem to a first-order language modeling the real numbers, one can use this approach to calculus that uses infinitesimal and infinites, not limits. Abraham Robinson rigorously developed it. You got it.
But calculus of error.
This is called non-standard analysis. You receive 10 points. Toss-up 4. The 6n-dimensional integral used to calculate this quantity can be rewritten with the assumption that the potential only includes pairwise interactions. That technique is called the Mayer cluster expansion. A common technique used to solve the Ising model is to express this quantity as the trace of a product of transfer matrices. This quantity can be obtained via a path integral of the Euclidean action, which can be shown by quick rotating the path integrals used to obtain the propagator. For a system of n indistinguishable particles, the total value of this quantity equals one individual particle's value for this quantity raised to the n power divided by n factorial. The expectation value of total energy.
Microstates.
The expectation, sure it is. The expectation value of total energy equals the negative of the derivative of the natural log of this quantity with respect to the thermal to n beta. Complex free energy equals negative kT times the natural log of this quantity, which is defined as the sum over all energy states. That is correct. Pretend those. Answer the following about the French mandate over Syria. Number teach. France was granted a mandate for Syria and Lebanon at this April 1920 conference, confirming the secret Sykes-Picot agreement signed 4 years earlier. This conference approved a treaty later ratified by the Treaty of Sèvres. San Remo. King Faisal proclaimed the Arab Kingdom of Syria in 1920, but then was quickly forced out by the invading nation in this battle, which saw General Gourod's forces overrun those of Yusuf al-Azma, 12 miles west of Damascus.
I don't know this. Do you know the place?
Aleppo. I don't know.
It's farther away.
I don't know.
Aleppo.
It's the Battle of Maïsaloun Pass. Under the reluctant assent of the French, the San Remo Conference incorporated this 1817 letter in which the namesake British Foreign Secretary confirmed two national homes for the Jews in Palestine.
It's all for declaration.
10. 5. The shutters of this artist, St. Catherine altarpiece, features the disembodied eyes of St. Otilia resting on top of a book to illustrate that her blindness was cured. A Latin inscription in a painting by this artist translates to, "I am a nymph of the sacred fountain. Do not disturb my sleep. I am resting." One of this artist's versions of the crucifixion features a converted centurion that rides a white horse and wears 16th century armor. The god Mercury holds onto a glass sphere, and a certain Trojan wears a luxurious red cape and steel plate armor in this artist's version of the Judgment of Paris. Archers lie in wait behind bushes in this artist's painting, The Stag Hunt of Elector Frederick the Wise, which depicts his patron. A black hat and a coat are often worn by Katerina von Bora's husbands in many of his portraits. For 10 points, in this artist from Saxony who painted several portraits of his friend Martin Luther. Your bonus. In John Martin Crawford's translation of a poem, this figure is referred to as the shepherd of the land clouds, the god of the breezes, the golden king, and the silver ruler of the air. For Nicoteach, name this god who creates 3 mystic maidens by rubbing his hands on his left knee. A rainbow acts as this god's bow, from which he shoots fiery copper arrows.
I don't know where
Sounds exciting, though.
Bring it.
Velas.
It's Uko. Uko conjures an ice storm to slow down Kiru, a fire-breathing horse who's pursued by this figure. This hero of the Kalevala either drowns or is killed by Sabihat while trying to capture the Swan of Turin.
Is that how it gets killed? I know, wait a minute. Damn, see,
Viracanus baptizes this woman's infant son and declares him to be the king of Karelia. This maiden from the Northland is the subject of the Kalevala's 50th and final rune.
Mariata.
What have you got from
Mariata.
Toss of 6. This military man authored an essay in the Southern Literary Messenger titled The Philosophy of Dress, in which he urged a dress code based on dignity, moderation, and neatness. This general wrote a letter to Joseph E. Johnston asking him to investigate a man with the pen name Bohemian. His son, known by the nickname Sandy, was engaged to Stonewall Jackson and married Kate Corbett, but died in battle at Fisher's Hill. After the general was kicked in the leg by Donkey at Malvern Hill, his duties were taken over by E. Porter Alexander. Following the Battle of Shepherdstown, this general was given the nicknames Granny and Old Mother because he withdrew troops prematurely from the Potomac River. He referred to his guns as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because he had been an Episcopal priest for 30 years before rising to become the chief of artillery for Robert Lee, serving in that role at Gettysburg. For 10 points, named this completely inept Confederate general called the Parson.
Longstreet.
That is incorrect.
I don't know.
That's time. It's William Pendleton.
Good old Poston Pendleton.
Is that you?
Yeah. That's hard. Don't worry about it, guys.
Toss of 7. This character discusses guinea pig breeding with Herr von Z before claiming that we live in the century of the plebeian. A shrug of certainty lifts this character up after his pince-nez shatters on the ground and his toothache mysteriously disappears. He thinks about the curve of Arlova's breast and writes in his diary about the relative maturity of the masses and the grammatical fiction. This man repeatedly receives the message, "Arise, ye wretched of the earth," but with "arise" spelled without the S. This man tells dock workers that they must break a strike before a German who lectures on Darwinism, Little Loey, hangs himself. No. He uses a quadratic alphabet to tap a code to communicate with his neighbors and is interrogated more harshly by a Neanderthal man named Gletkin than by Ivanov. This inhabitant of Cell 404 is sentenced to death after he misapplied ES number 1 and the party for points in his old Bolshevik protagonist, Arthur Kessler's Darkness Act.
Like, is his name Rubashov?
Yeah, it's his name.
Yeah, there we go.
Damn. What's his name?
Your bonus! This composer's piano sonata in B minor is played without movement breaks and begins with G octaves. For temporary each name, this virtuoso pianist who composed Année le Pèlerinage, the Mephisto waltzes, and the Hungarian Rhapsodies.
Yes.
This set of 6 solo piano pieces by Liszt are all composed in E major or E flat major. The third and most popular one is marked Lento Placido and is an arrangement of a folk song later used in the first Hungarian Rhapsody. The Consolations. Liszt's important ordering works include a fantasy and fugue on this theme, which serves as the basis for the tone row and Anton Mayberg's string quartet. It's the third subject of the subject used in Contrapunctus 14 in the art of fugue.
I have no idea.
That's the thing. Or BACA.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
20 points. Toss of 8. With Milton Bloom, this thinker wrote a book using a tough shit approach about business called executive leadership. He coined the term awfulizing and catastrophizing to describe behavior that should be fought with shame attack exercises. He called the harmful act of imposing absolute values on the world masturbation. Many of his ideas, such as the distinction between discomfort disturbances and ego disturbances, were developed by Hill's writing Sex Without Guilt and The Art and Science of Love. This thinker developed a model of causation in which an activating event induces a belief, which itself is responsible for human feeling. That is his ABC model. Like Aaron Beck, this psychologist developed an individualist approach that seeks to correct harmful behavior by converting socially destructive tendencies into constructive ones. Pinpoints named the psychologist who developed rational and emotive behavioral therapy. That's time. That's Albert Ellis.
Oh,
No takers. Toss of 9. A set of coupled differential equations modeling more than one of these systems is the Clohesi-Wiltshire equations. Jacob Thorne gave ballistic power series solutions to a 2-point boundary value problem modeling these systems. Solving that problem is equivalent to solving Lambert's problem and finding one of these systems. The method pioneered by Josiah Gibbs to determine one of these systems merely requires 3 coplanar position vectors. By using station keeping, one can make one of these systems that resembles a Lucian curve. The energy conservation equation of these systems is the Vis-Viva equation. Switching from one...
That is like a two-body system,
I will prompt you.
like central force.
No. I just want switching from one of these systems to another can be achieved with a Hohmann transfer, and the point of greatest disturbance in one of these systems is the apoapsis. For 10 points, name these paths of astronomical objects, which may be periodic.
Orbits.
Yeah. Your bonus. A Song of Fate in this novel compares men to water hurled from cliff to cliff, downward for years into uncertainty, and his protagonist decides to fight as a Greek Revolution against the Ottomans for 10 points each. Name this 1799 novel, written primarily in the form of letters to Bellarmine. It shares its name with a prose romance by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and an unfinished epic about the Titanomachy by John Keats.
Yeah, makes sense.
There you go.
Hyperion.
This German Enlightenment author of Hyperion and the elegies Bread and Wine and Patmos died before he could complete the Death of Empedocles. Heidegger gave a lecture course on this man's in the Ister. Hyperion's lover in the novel is this character who opposes Hyperion's desire to fight in the Greek Revolution and implores him to be an educator of the people. She shares her name with a character in another work who gives a speech within a speech about an in-between who is a child of poverty and contrivance.
I don't recognize that, but what's her name? It's,
Impress me.
Galatea.
Diotima.
Hold us into easy mode.
That is insane. people are suffering. Toss of 10. This film character states bourbon cannot cure insomnia. This man, who first appeared in books by the nudist novelist John Ball, tells the abortionist Mama Kaleva that she can whisper 2 little words and he'll be on his way. In a memorable scene, he correctly deduces that another character alters his nightly route so that he can see Dolores' Purdy mood. After this man discovers a piece of fern in a car, he questions a man that compares him to an epiphytic plant. In that memorable scene, he's slapped and slaps Mr. Endicott. At the opening of the film, Leslie informs the mayor that she'll let go of her husband's engineers that are building a factory unless this man is put on the case to determine who murdered Philip Colbert. When asked what he is called up in Philadelphia, this character gives his most iconic response. 10 points named this detective, played by Sidney Poitier in the film In the Heat of the Night, who memorably states, "They call me Mr.
They call me Mr. Pibbs.
No.
Cool.
Wait, what did Will say?
No.
I said Pibbs, but it's
Oh, I
it's
got it.
Tibbs.
Oh, okay.
Mr.
Yes.
Tibbs.
Was that an egg or was that at the end?
That was at the end. So.
Oh, looks like 190 to negative 15.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Toss of 11. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. According to Abu Lafat's Kitab al-Tariq, the first members of this religious sect were the loyal children of Hophni and Phinehas, and the women they slept with inside a tabernacle. Josephus' Antiquities claims that this sect was comprised of pagan Sidonians and that it worshipped Jupiter Hellenius. This religious group rejects Mount Moriah, the location where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. Instead, they perform sheep sacrifices during the festival of the sacrifice, where they believe it happened, Mount Gerizim.
The Samaritans.
That's right. Teach, answer the following about the interaction of Rome and Dacia. This king of the Dacians and Gitai, who ruled from 82 to 44 BCE, long before Decebalus, moved the Dacian capital to Sarmizegetusa and commanded an empire from the Haemus Mountains to the wooded Carpathians. He sided with his good buddy Pompey and warred with Caesar.
Oh, shit. Oh, who's the Dacian in that?
What do you have for me?
No.
His name was Burebista. Decebalus was crushed at the Second Battle of Tapai by this Roman emperor, who erected a column to celebrate his victory. He was the second of the 5 good emperors after Nerva. This Roman emperor formally abandoned the province of Dacia and focused his energy on defeating Queen Zenobia and the Palmyrene Empire at battles like Edessa. What do you got?
I don't know.
What do you got?
I don't have anything.
Okay, you don't have anything. It's a relief.
I was trying to give you guys a
10 points.
Oh, that's what you're trying to do.
Oh, okay.
Toss of 12. A poem by this man contains a passage that reads, "They must hold against the fire rain, or when, sometimes it seems, upwards hands down, against, Hilary self quickly took her bearings, did not appear entirely, a height of 5,000 feet, and is divided into 111 numbered sections." Another of his poems, which includes the lines, "Sometimes they were in sordid sexual situations, at others a smidgen of fun would intrude in our day," features the Vivians, and was inspired by the work of outside artist Henry Darger. This author included... That's right.
That's right. That doesn't sound.
Moses Gomberg created one of these compounds using triphenyl chloride and zinc. For 10 points each, name these compounds which can be generated by photoinitiators. Reactions of them are depicted using single-headed curved arrows. Yeah. In the Hunziker reaction, a silver salt one of these compounds is converted to an alkyl halide via a free radical intermediate. These compounds have a peak of around 10 to 13 ppm in proton NMR. You got
Carbomoids.
carboxylic acids.
Oh.
Nitrones, such as PDN or DMPO, are often used in this technique, in which unstable radicals are converted to a more stable adduct, which can then be spectroscopically analyzed. What do you got? It's called spin trapping. You get tossed, right? Toss of 13. One member of this group fractured his skull when he was pushed down a marble staircase at the Royal Automobile Club on Pall Mall after a drunken argument causing lifelong mental trauma. Another probable member wrote a book on the social history of Christian polygamy entitled After Polygamy Was Made a Sin, and a study on Moliere. This group was assisted by the publisher of the New Republic, Michael Whitney Straight, and had its regular activities planned out by Theodore Maley. Their number likely included John Cairncross, as well as Anthony Blunt, and several members of the Apostles Club, who often approached employees working at Bletchley Park. A more famous member meeting with Australian actress Coral Brown is the basis for Alan Bennett's film An Englishman Abroad. These members were Donald MacLean and the flamboyantly gay Guy Burgess, who tried to protect his principal by fleeing separately. Uncovered by the Venona Project for 10 points, in the Soviet spy ring led by namesake double agent in Britain around 1950.
The Zinoviev, right?
No.
You'll be
Yeah.
Wait.
You got time to. Your bonus. This album includes a lyric duet for bass and bass clarinet on its second track, Something Sweet, Something Tender. Forgot what teach James' 1964 album, which also includes the tracks Straight Up and Down and Gutzalone. It was recorded by Eric Dolphy months before his death.
Do I know Eric Dolphy albums? The answer is I do not.
Well then. Okay, it's Out to Lunch. The opening track of Out to Lunch, Hat and Beard, is a tribute to this pianist who composed the jazz standards Straight No Chaser and Round Midnight. This musician signed with Columbia Records sang to his performance Round Midnight at the 1955 Newport Jazz Festival. He recorded a version of Straight No Chaser on his 1958 album Milestones, which featured Cannonball Adderley on saxophone. What do you got? Al. That's Miles Davis.
It is Davis, okay.
14. You got 10 on that. Lung cancer of this tissue can be caused by a fusion of the CHOP gene with either FUS or the EWS gene, while other cancers of this tissue are present in Madelung disease and Durkheim disease. A class of cytokines named for and secreted by cells in this tissue include apelin-resistant and TNF-alpha. Stem cells derived from this tissue include PLA cells as well as the stromal vascular fracture.
Adipose tissue.
That's right, you. 10 points are yours.
I invented that.
This 1937 paper posits a moving equilibrium in which expansion occurs until the transaction cost of an internal operation equals the cost of an open market operation. Therefore, it's a famous paper that discusses how individuals minimize the cost of economic coordination.
Well, maybe not. So, well, I'll stop thinking about systems. Better though.
What do you got?
Never mind theory of trade.
It's The Nature of the Firm.
That's way better.
This man won the 1991 Nobel Prize in Economics for his paper, The Nature of the Firm, as well as The Problem of Social Cost. Barring high transaction costs, bargaining is the cheapest solution of externalities, according to his namesake. This other economist argued that an individual may stop using the firm, voice his or her concerns, or choose to remain loyal in a 1970 book that examines the impact of a declining firm, exit, voice, and loyalty. It sure does.
So quizzical relevant.
No. Very quizzical relevant. It's Albert Hirschman. Paul Litvak would be disappointed. Toss up 15. There you go, 10 all. The Good Sister and the Lord of Two Lands are worshipped in the northern half of a symmetrical temple whose southern half is dedicated to this god. This god spends seed with his phallus and takes wives from their husbands according to the pyramid texts. The final ruler of the 12th dynasty was named for the beauty of this god, whose worship was promulgated by that ruler's father, Amenemhat III. The temple of Medinat Mahdi was dedicated to this god and his wife, Renunet. The primary temple of this god was home to his jewel-adorned avatar, Petsuchos.
That's what I was thinking. It's so bad.
Speaking correctly. Your bonus. Answer the following about the ridiculous history of Queensland for 10 points each. This 1857 massacre occurred at the namesake station on the Dawson River, where Yemen Aborigines attacked the hut of Martha Fraser and killed her entire family. The patriarch William Fraser was away in England and proceeded to launch a comic book style campaign of revenge against the Aborigines.
You know about this massacre in Queensland?
Sure don't.
Oh.
What do you got? All right, it's the Hornet Bank Massacre. This national airline of Australia, known as the Flying Kangaroo, was founded in 1920 to serve the outback regions of Queensland.
You are Australian.
No, I thought this would be more accessible than it is.
Australian.
Okay, it's Qantas. In 1922.
Oh, that's what that is.
That is what that is. Mystery solved. In 1922, a crackerjack plan developed by the scientist Reginald Montgomery led the Queensland Parliament to vote to import 101 examples of this type of animal from Hawaii in order to combat the damage to crops caused by beetles. The plan failed when these animals overran Queensland and the Northern Territory.
They still have that cane toad problem.
That's right.
They do still have that cane tone problem.
You guys had
All right.
In one of his works, this man used the term flagrant to refer to the sense of sudden terror in man, and lubet to mean the lustful desire that leads man to good or evil. Two of his lesser-known works, On the Threefold Life of Man and 40 Questions Concerning the Soul, were later cited by Nicholas Berdyaev for coining the term Ungrund to describe an abyss of holy nothingness. While working as a shoemaker, he was often harassed by the local Tanners Guild and was persecuted by Gregor Richter for writing a work with the Latin title Aurora, which he wrote after watching sunlight reflect off a pewter dish. Influenced by Paracelsus, he identified the Holy Trinity with salt, sulfur, and mercury in his book Mysterium Magnum. And was a 16th century German mystic known for his holy visions.
I don't think he's right. Wasn't my strength card?
That is incorrect. No doubt.
That's not the right country or anything.
Okay. It's Jacob Bowl.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
That's
that guy.
man.
In this pack.
Toss 17. A character in this novel complains about the garlic breath of a money changer in a chapter set in the same place as one in which Sata claims that the world needs sin. In this novel, the illiterate clothier Esther delivers messages, including some from Hassan and some sent by way of the slave girl Hayri. One character in this book steals a pin which Bihzad of Herat used to blind himself. Another of its characters tells the story of an old master who first worked for a black sheep leader and then a rival white sheep leader after being blinded. This novel's protagonist is influenced by Master Osman, who rejects innovation, and his uncle Inishte, who tries to implement the techniques of Frankish artists. Butterfly, Stork, and Olive narrate stories about style, signature,
My name is Red.
sure is.
Yeah.
This is a fucking miniature.
Your bonus is, this character thrice investigates the butterfly dream and cleverly executes court official Lu in a pair of plays by Guan Hongqing, the author of The Justice to Do A, for 10 points each. Identify this recurring protagonist of many Yuan Dynasty Zaju plays. He later appears as the recurring protagonist of Gong'an or crime fiction novels, such as the Wuxia-influenced Seven Heroes and Five Gallants.
Oh shit. Okay.
I think it's D. I think it's Judge D. But I'm not sure.
Go for
What have you got?
Judge D.
You were on the right track. It's Judge Bao.
Damn.
Judge Bao appeared in this Yuan Dynasty play by Li Qianfu, or in which he places the child Shulong in the title Construct in a trial of his Haikong is yes. The first Western translation of the Chalk Circle was produced by Stanislas Julien, who also translated a history of the basis for this Chinese literary character. This reincarnation of the Golden Cicada is sent to Tianzhu to retrieve some scriptures in a Ming Dynasty novel.
Sure. Lucky King.
No, it's Zhuang Zhang.
Oh, Monkey King's no naughty, but he comes.
All right, you got 10 points for that. 18. Butyllithium converts a dibromocyclopropane to an alene through one of these intermediates in the Scatterbowl rearrangement. Reaction of a metal carbonyl complex with potassium intercalated in graphite and then trimethylsilyl chloride forms these compounds in the Hegedus-Semmelhack procedure. One of these compounds is an intermediate in the stepwise mechanism of the Wolff rearrangement. Imidazole 2-uridines are an example of an unusually stable N-heterocyclic type of these compounds. A diiodiomethane complex with zinc, whose reactivity resembles these compounds, is used in the cyclopropionation of alkenes in the Simmons-Smith reaction. Transition metal complexes with these compounds can be either in a singlet or a triplet state, depending on whether they are of the Fischer or the Schrock type. Bonus. Dimensional analysis of this phenomenon yields the result that the Nusselt number is a function of the Reynolds and Prandtl numbers for 10 points each. Name this phenomenon, which comes in forced and free types based on whether or not there's an external fluid flow. It is the primary mechanism for heat transfer in the mantle.
Convection.
This quantity is the equivalent of the Nusselt number for mass convection. For forced mass convection, it is a function of the Reynolds and Schmidt numbers, and it is equal to the convective mass transfer coefficient times the characteristic length divided by the diffusion coefficient.
Grasshopper number?
Sounds like it's either that or pencil or something. I don't know.
You got it.
Grasshopper.
No, it's the Sherwood number.
Oh, damn.
This theorem is used to derive the aforementioned relation between the Sherwood, Reynolds, and Schmidt numbers for forced mass conversion. When using this theorem, kinematic viscosity is written as length squared times time raised to the negative 1 power. It is for 20 points.
Here we go.
Top 19. According to legend, a courtier of this kingdom foretold that at his death, his blood would flow white as milk, and his decapitated head would fly to the top of the hill. Those miracles performed by the minister Ikadon convinced the nobles to change their religion. This kingdom's founder was said to be born after light shone in a forest near a well, where a white horse bowed and laid an egg, so it adopted a name translating as chicken forest. A new code of law was issued by its king Pofung, who extended its borders by absorbing the Gaia Confederacy. Its royal classes were known as Seongol and Jingol, which meant sacred bone and true bone, respectively. It often shifted alliances between its neighbors, the Bakje and the That's better.
Yep.
That's why.
I was like, oh.
Your bonus. This deity depicted as is depicted as a white goose flying over an endless expanse of water, which represents time, while the mother goddess Akana calls for him to create the world. For him to each compare. Contrasted with the evil underworld god Erlik, named this sky father deity worshipped by nomads of the Mongolian steppe as part of a namesake religion. This early 20th century Russian movement related to Tengrism worships a white god called the Spirit of Altai, who appeared as a white rider on a white horse in visions. This word also designates the Buddha in Mongolian text.
You don't know this?
Buddha in
What do you got?
Wow.
No, it's Burkhan. Burkhan was also the term used for the incarnate messengers of the god of light in this dualistic religion, which has texts like the Book of Giants.
Yeah, that one.
That's
That's the dualistic
last.
religion.
This work's main theme begins with an E flat minor chord and alternates between major and minor chords for 14 measures before reaching B minor. That theme, which opens this work in 3/4 time, reappears after the Death of Oates and again in the 4/4 in the Alla Marcio Moderato epilogue. This work's nature music includes pianissimo 32nd note xylophone runs, and its third movement, Landscape, climaxes with a fortissimo organ solo. Quotations from Shelley, the Psalms, Donne, and Coleridge are sometimes read between movements of this work, preceding an excerpt from a diary in which a man claims, "I do not regret this journey."
The Dream of Cratius.
That is incorrect. Fine is fine. Its first movement features a wordless women's chorus and a solo soprano, and the percussion ensemble includes deep bells, celesta, and wind machine for 10 points, named The Symphony by Red Vaughan Williams, based on a film score about Robert Falcon Scott's failed attempts to reach the North Pole. Here's your bonus. This author was able to recover from the effects of alcoholism to write the first play, The Antiphon, but never completed a biography of the Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven. 10 points each, named as a member of the Provincetown Players, who wrote and illustrated the novel Rider and the chapbook, The Book of Repulsive Women. What do you got?
No.
Juna Barnes. Juna Barnes wrote this romantic love in which she fictionalized herself as Nora Flood and based Nora's lover, Robin Vogt, in part on her own lover, Thelma Wood.
Yeah, where's Nora Flood from?
What do you got?
No.
Nightwood. This poet of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock edited and wrote the introductions in 1937 Harper Brace edition of Nightwood.
305.65.
Well,
Somebody should stay here, I guess.
Yeah, figure out the word I was trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Like, the word is